With the U.S. economy teetering on the edge of a recession and inflation running at a four-decade high, the Federal Reserve announced another 0.75 percentage point increase in its benchmark interest rates on Wednesday, the second such increase in just over a month. The U.S. Central Bank is aggressively raising rates at levels unseen since the mid-1990s as it struggles to tamp down soaring prices, which rose by an annual rate of 9.1% in June, the fastest inflation rate since 1981. The hike raises the Fed's cost of borrowing to between 2.25% and 2.5%, and this is the Fed's fourth rate increase this year. Britain's electricity supply could be tight at times this winter as the energy price cap is set to raise further, a body tasked with balancing the country's grid has announced. The electricity system operator expects that margins might narrow significantly towards December, but it believes it should be able to keep the lights on. The grid is tasked with ensuring the UK has enough electricity generators ready to go when demand peaks. And still talking power, French power group EDF has issued a new profit warning on Thursday due to a drop in nuclear output and posted a big loss for the first half of the year. EDF said it has estimated the negative impact of lower nuclear production on its 2022 core earnings at 24 billion euros, a bigger hit than the 18.5 billion euros previously assumed. Half of the group's fleet of 56 nuclear reactors are currently offline due to planned maintenance and works to fix corrosion issues, just as Europe faces an energy crisis due to the war in Ukraine. And energy is part of the conversation everywhere as the Australian Energy and Chemicals Group OMV more than doubled second quarter core operating profits on the back of soaring gas prices fueled by the war in Ukraine. It reported clean current cost of supplies earnings before interest and tax, which excludes special items and inventory gains or losses of 2.94 billion euros on Thursday, beating analyst expectations of 2.79 billion euros. The group, which in past years benefited from profits on Russian assets, said it purchased on average 6.67 terawatt hours per month of natural gas under long-term supply agreements with Gazprom in Germany and Austria in the second quarter. And as we continue our conversations, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has a new plan to solve the energy crisis in Africa's most industrialized economy. More on this after the break. South Africa has around 46,000 megawatts of electricity generation capacity, with consumption typically peaking at 32,000 megawatts. However, due to poor maintenance of its power plants, the country only generates around 27,600 megawatts, about 60% of its potential capacity. This is one of the reasons why South Africa has been experiencing power issues lately, with blackouts and load shedding becoming more common than citizens would like. However, there could be lights at the end of this proverbial tunnel. President Cyril Ramaphosa recently announced a new set of plans that could see the country's power crisis become a thing of the past. Joining me now from Cape Town, South Africa, is Professor Mark Swilling. He's co-director of the Center for Sustainability Transitions at Stellenbosch University and a commissioner on the National Planning Commission. Professor Swilling, welcome to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me. Let's start with a current update of the situation. So as we know, South Africa entered stage 6 load shedding a few weeks ago because of the strike by Eskom workers. Where do things stand currently now?
Well, the strike is over and load shedding has substantially decreased. We haven't had load shedding for quite a while, but that's temporary. It's not possible to predict when the old coal-fired power stations are going to trip. So we're in a very unstable and uncertain environment.
So we know recently that while presenting at the South African Communist Party's elective Congress on July 15th, President Ramaphosa actually said that establishing a new utility would help reduce the risk posed by Eskom's failings. He pointed to China having a number of state-owned power providers who compete among themselves. And he said that given the fact that Eskom has been a monopoly for over 100 years, it can't be enough, and it continues to be a great risk to the country. So let's start the conversation from there. How viable or even sensible do you think it is to have a possibility of yet another ESCOM?
I don't think we should take that comment very seriously. In fact, he himself, a few days later, when asked about it, said his words were something along the lines, well, that's not a priority now. It was a very political conference, and it was, I think, really pandering to the gallery. There was absolutely no mention of it on Monday night when he made his keynote speech, which has fundamentally launched South Africa into a completely new electricity era. And there was no mention of an ESCOM 2.0.
Fantastic. I think a lot of people would be happy to hear about that. So let's talk about the debt as well. ESCOM has some 400 billion rand, or around $24 billion of debts that it cannot service. This is historical debt, unfortunately continues to pile on, and the president said a plan would be developed by October to deal with the debt. So what do we expect this plan for ESCOM's debt to look like?
Well, if you look at ESCOM's revenues, it can handle a debt of about 200 billion rand. And as you correctly say, the debt is nearly 400 billion. So whatever the plan is, however it's going to be done, the target needs to be to basically remove 200 billion rand off ESCOM's balance sheet. Exactly how that is achieved, nobody really knows. ESCOM has, however, gradually been reducing the debt, but that is mainly because every year it gets a massive tranche of out of the budget in order to help it pay off some of its debt.
So when we look at the policies the president also mentioned, he talked about the country removing limits for power generation license, which could also help ease the process for mines and other businesses to set up their own independent power plants, whether solar or however it may be. How effective do you think this policy would be? And I'm asking that given that last year we heard the president talk about unbundling ESCOM into three separate three separate business entities on their own, but not privatizing, not deregulating fully the sector. So how can a policy like this exist within that sort of context?
Okay, the unbundling strategy is essentially to split ESCOM, which is a publicly owned, vertically integrated utility, into three. A generation unit, a transmission unit, and a distribution unit. And all of those three companies would then be owned by ESCOM Holdings, and the primary shareholder, the only shareholder of that is the state. So the unbundling is absolutely necessary because the future business of ESCOM is actually buying and selling electricity, not so much generating, because it's going to be closing down its coal-fired power stations over the next 20 years. While on the other hand, private investors invest in what we call IPPs, independent power producers, will be investing to construct new generators, primarily wind, solar, and gas. And so the two are perfectly compatible. You would have a publicly owned transmission entity that would buy and sell electricity from privately owned generators.
So the president promised to fundamentally transform the electricity sector and then also position it for future sustainability by appointing boards for the transmission boards and generation entities, just as you mentioned, that separation now. And all this will come out under the Electricity Amendments Bill. When you look at that separation and you look at the appointment of boards, I don't think South Africa lacks boards or lacks management or people in specific positions. Do you think that beyond the promises that the president made during his speech, we can see an actualization of this transformation?
Well, yes, the National Transmission Company of South Africa has been set up. A proposed board has been sent to the relevant minister for approval, which has to then be approved by the cabinet. So that's ready to roll, and the president said that's going to happen imminently. You do need to split ESCOM up. I mean, over the last 20, 30 years, especially in Africa, there's been a transformation in the electricity supply industry as the old vertically integrated electricity companies were broken up, largely towards privatization. But there's been a slowdown of that, and even a reversal, like in the UK, the renationalization of the national grid company. So I think South Africa is kind of leapfrogging over the privatization era into a publicly owned set of utilities that will be more streamlined and more focused. So it's absolutely necessary to break up Eskom. Also, what you need to realize is Eskom was the focus of state capture. So it was looted and hollowed out. And there's still a lot of state capture for, elements or corruption elements in Eskom. So breaking it up is also a way of flushing out the people that you don't want. And the president did refer to this as one of the causes of the problems that Eskom is facing, on top of sabotage and inefficiencies.
So privatization is not a word spoken often when it comes to the Eskom situation, more around this deregulation and, of course, even having cities like Cape Town setting up their own IPPs. But do you think privatization, maybe not fully along the value chain, but in some aspects of it, can also help Eskom?
Well, basically, that's what's happening in generation. So you referred to earlier the lifting of the cap on private generators. Last year, it moved from 1 megawatt to 100 megawatt. Now the ceiling has been completely removed. So what that means is a mine, a factory, a shopping mall, a set of investors, whoever, can apply to Eskom to connect to the grid with 150, 200, 250 megawatt generators. That's private. So some trade unions who are critical of privatization are saying this is privatization of the electricity supply industry through the back door, using renewables and decarbonization and net zero as an excuse. I don't have the same reading of that. This is the mobilization of private capital for investment in energy infrastructures that will bring load shedding to an end and will allow economic recovery within the framework of very clear state policies.
So, of course, we know that it's going to take some time for some of these reforms and policies and breakdowns to bear fruits for South Africans, but there's a need now. So, as you said, load shedding has reduced, has come down to a more bearable minimum. But is there anything being done right now to close the gap between the electricity demand and supply in the short term?
Well, it depends what you mean by short term. If you mean in the next 3 to 6 months, not much can be done other than to slightly improve the efficiency of the Eskom power stations and to buy more energy from the South African power pool, the Southern African power pool. That's really more or less all you can really do. But if you mean within the next 24 months, can load shedding brought to an end? Yes, it can. Because if you add up if you look at the numbers that the president was talking about, he was talking about 83 projects of 6,000 totaling 6,200 megawatts. That's a total investment bill of 76 billion rand. Those are ready to roll. And he also lifted the cap. He increased the total amount of electricity to be procured through what is called bid window 6, which is an auction mechanism from 2.6 to 5.2. If you add those two together, it's well over 10,000 megawatts within the next 24 months or so, 24 to 36. And that would bring load shedding to an end, but it would also establish the basis for economic recovery.
All right.
If it happens.
A good note to end on with Eskom there and load shedding. Some optimism as to seeing transformation and change in the next 2 months, in the next 24 months, rather. Professor Mark Swilling, thank you so much for joining me on Business Edge.
Thank you.
And with Africa's most industrialized economy taking a battery, not just from a recession that came about because of COVID, but also of the Russia-Ukraine crisis as well, it is some good news to hear that there could be an end to load shedding that has affected the economy. And some say it's almost difficult to estimate the loss that load shedding has caused. Now, when we come back after a very quick timeout, we're back in Nigeria, where the country has edged one step closer to having a law that specifically deals with startups. That conversation right after this. Nigeria's tech ecosystem is flourishing, and now the Nigerian Senate, with the Startup Bill, which is now heading to Nigeria's House of Representatives, will move forward and it will go through the full legislative process. If it passes there, it will then be presented before President Muhammadu Buhari to be signed into law. The Startup Bill aims to unlock the full potential of the Nigerian digital ecosystem and provide a legal and institutional framework for the development of tech-enabled startups in Nigeria. Joining me from Abuja, Nigeria, the Federal Capital Territory, Nosike Nwigene is the communications specialist for the Nigeria Startup Bill. Nosike, it's good to see you again. Welcome again. Thank you so much for joining us. I think we'd have to say congratulations now. Some of the hard work has paid off. I see you're very happy about that. So now that the bill has gone from the Senate, is going to the House, that's the legislative process. But beyond that, and outside of the legislative process, what's next? We've had some public hearings. What's the sort of, I guess, the environment, I guess I would say, or the feelings around this next step?
First of all, there's some excitement, right now we're waiting, so it's heading back to the executive, obviously to the president for his assent. And obviously after that, there's still implementation to take place. There are always bills, right? There are always laws created, but implementation is key to success. This would mean working hand in hand with all the stakeholders, right? The government MDs needed to bring in, needed to, build this from the beginning. And, they're all the crucial part of this process. There's also state adoption to look forward to, the 36 states and the FCT, and some measure of state adoption is required to, for this to have the impact it's supposed to. The NSB Secretariat obviously has, deployed resources for, for us to be able to achieve that wide state adoption, if you will.
Do you anticipate any kind of maybe obstacle, or at least maybe some serious criticism in the House of Representatives? Many particularly believe the House of Representatives is where issues truly are thrashed out when it comes to bills, because they feel sometimes that it's a bit closer to the people than the Senate. So what are you anticipating with the House of Representatives conversations that may come up?
A lot of this process has been working in tandem with, both the upper and lower house. All our support, all the supporters, the legislators are a big part of the process. And all the concerns that could have, come up have already been thrashed out before we got to this point. So at this point, it's really not a concern anymore. Well, it's always a concern. There will always be concerns. But the beauty about laws is that they're there to be amended and worked on. And to, we're meant to make sure all the stakeholders are, and that even includes you and I, all benefit from it. So at this point, I think we're past the worst, if you will.
Okay, so let's talk about one of those concerns. Now, the FinTech Association of Nigeria says Nigerian startups raised around $1.37 billion in 2021. Now, with the startup bill, it proposes that 51% of the shares of a startup should be held by Nigerians for them to be eligible for the benefits that are promised in the bill. And there are some concerns that this could affect the ability of maybe fintechs in particular, or even just tech startups, to raise capital going forward. What do you think of that?
Well, these concerns are valid. You can't shut, and even the slightest opposition down, you can't. But this law isn't peculiar to Nigeria. This Startup Act, it's common procedure elsewhere. That being said, whatever the hurdles is the wrong term, but whatever the challenges this may bring, right? I'm pretty sure that as the ecosystem can find its way around it. 51% isn't a lot to ask for Nigerian ownership, right? For a business that's going to ultimately draw revenue from the country. So while obviously you could argue that it stifles some founder setups on the whole, I don't see it being the big issue that it is, especially since, like I said, the startup ecosystem in relation to this policy shift is continuously evolving. So these discussions will come up, and eventually we'll find a solution for that as well. No bill is ironclad, right?
Okay, so as you mentioned, this is not something new to the entire world. Nigeria will join Tunisia and Senegal if this passes and makes it to President Buhari and he signs, in enacting legislation designed to aid startups. So when we see the fact that this is not new to Nigeria, we can also review how effective has such legislation like this been in other countries? Have they really hit the mark that they were anticipated to hit?
So Tunisia, for example, right, was the first African country, if I'm not mistaken, to pass the Startup Act. I think it was even one of the first in the world, but I stand corrected. First of all, over there is poured entrepreneurship by easing the process, for company creation, right? And some of those elements are integrated into the Nigerian Startup Bill as well. Made it easy for their entrepreneurs to set up shop legally, incorporate, and then do their business. From what I understand, there's still some bottlenecks that need to be resolved. But all in all, it even shows me the numbers that, if I'm not mistaken as well, Tunisia's startup activity has grown, multiple since that time. So while there are bottlenecks, I believe that they're dealing with, I'm not overly conversant with the situation over there. But while I know there are bottlenecks that they're dealing with, I also know that there are conversations about how to take those out one at a time.
All right, so as we wrap this up, what do you think the key takeaways are? You're making this sound literally like it is a done deal, that it will land on President Buhari's desk before February 2023, and he will sign. So what do you think are the key takeaways, regardless of the criticisms and some of the concerns that are still being raised?
Jobs, right? Nigeria is one of the the average age for Nigeria is, I believe, 18 or 19, between. That's a lot of young people consuming tech, everything from RiseVest to WhatsApp. You now have legislation that opens the landscape and allows the young people to go from consumers to producers, creating unique Nigerian solutions to Nigerian problems, right? A startup founder is not going to take the same approach he would in, say, Spain he would if he grew up in Surulere or Lagos, because he understands the peculiarities of dealing with daily Nigerian life and then figuring out ways to use tech to solve those problems. Of course, startups now can also a lot of bottlenecks that would have affected general startup growth have been addressed. There's also a big tent approach, obviously, which is central to this entire process, which is engaging the ecosystem, people like you and I who are the consumers, and then government and regulation on how we can best be part of this, this startup growth. We're in a good place, yeah. We really are in a good place, and while we need to understand that, even for critics of the bill, we need to understand that this is more of a journey than it is a destination. And so therefore, we've taken a big first step, albeit an impactful one. So yeah, let's kumbaya and fingers crossed the president signs, before he hands over to the next president. Exactly.
All right, so I can feel your excitement. So we have to say a big congratulations for the work well done to those at the Nigeria Startup Bill. We'll be following closely. So all the conversations that need to be had on this, we look forward to having them with you and those in the space as well. Nosike, thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. Cheers. Bye.
All right. And I think you probably felt his excitement as well with this latest step. Now, Nigeria has been criticized for not having an enabling business environment for startups with disruptive regulations, lack of regulatory certainty, weak infrastructures like broadband, open data, and digital platforms. And many are hoping that the bill will address these issues. You're watching Business Edge. We're wrapping things up, and we go straight to NC4 to watch. And NC4 to watch kicks off in the eastern parts of the continent now at a time where a severe lack of crucial agricultural input is endangering the success of the nation's crops and could result in major food shortages. The state-owned Kenya Electricity Generating Company has announced intentions to establish a fertilizer facility. And moving on from there, the Global Chief Executive Officer of Open Government Partnerships, Sanjay Pardian, has said Nigeria can save over $15 billion of illicit financial flows if it is able to eliminate anonymous ownership of companies through the implementation of beneficial ownership register by the Corporate Affairs Commission. Sanjay disclosed the findings by the World Bank, which revealed that between 1980 to 2010, 70% of corruption cases involved anonymous shell companies. South Africa's government has sought a series of commitments by labor unions and businesses ranging from lower entry-level wages to an agreement to boost investment as part of a plan to revive the nation's struggling economy. The proposals angered both parties because they contain stipulations they are not willing to meet, and they want government to do more to confront immediate problems such as power outages and state corruption. And finally, there is confirmation that leaders in business have put pressure on the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe to clear early backlogs from foreign currency auctions in order to maintain market stability. Zimbabwean businesses are under pressure after it was reported that the central bank disbursed funding for June allocations while still owing money for the previous 5 months of the year. And that's it on Business Edge. Don't forget to follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can also download our mobile app, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and of course, watch us live on the platforms we are on. We're going to have a very big special announcement for you tomorrow, so you don't want to miss the show as we tell you something great that's coming your way. I'm Tolulokwe Adileru Balogun. You'll be watching Business Edge on News Central. Up next is News Central Now. Stay with us.